since 2012, um, diagnoses of autism spectrum disorder are up, and they're at roughly 1 in 100 children worldwide at this point. And what drew me to your work was how thoughtful you are about making this something that any child can read this and enjoy it. Period. Any child. But the fact that it is also, in my opinion, such a thoughtfully crafted tool to help, especially parents who might really be struggling, to give them something else. That it's okay to try. You have to try other things. It's one of the reasons why I love mentioning it whenever I can to anyone who is willing to listen.
I said to myself, you know what? Don't when you're creating the story, don't tell the reader that the superhero is on the spectrum. Don't tell them. Don't, instead, showcase the nuances, the hallmarks through their personality. And that way it creates a conversation.
Welcome to the neutral ground. So, you might have noticed that recently on the show, I've been talking quite a bit about myth and heroic narratives. I think that these are one of the many tools that we have at our disposal to beat back despair and to find the courage to help ourselves and others. No one is putting that message into action better than my guest, Led Bradshaw. Led is a returning guest and a friend of the show. He is the co-author and illustrator of the Jake Jetpulse comic universe. His partner in the development of this comic is none other than his son, Jake. What started out as an endeavor for a father to help his son maneuver through the world with autism spectrum disorder has become a way to help parents everywhere find a new way to communicate and educate their children. In this episode, we talk a lot about comics, specifically Batman, and we talk quite a bit about Superman as well, the Snyderverse, all of that. And we get a wonderful update on what's to come in the Jake Jetpulse universe as well. I can't stress enough how much in awe I am of the work that Led is doing to help his son and others. And I encourage you to go to his website, which I've listed in the episode notes, to learn more about his work and to purchase a book or two to help support him. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Led Bradshaw. I know I did. Led, welcome back to the neutral ground. Now, a lot has happened in the superhero world since we last spoke, and I have been itching to talk with someone about all of this for a long time now, and I couldn't think of a better person to have this discussion with than you. So, first, thank you for coming back on, and absolutely, it's my pleasure. This is, like I said, I've been looking forward to this actually quite a bit. Now, I do have some new followers, some new people who might be, needing a good, proper introduction to you and what you do. So, if you don't mind, can I ask you to talk a little bit about your amazing work with Jake Jetpulse Comics and what prompted you to start your own comic book series?
Okay, well, my name is Led Bradshaw, and I am the owner and creator of Jetpulse Studios, which is the company that I started to have fun, connect, and create comics that resonated with me and with kids to just bring fun back, like the comics and stuff. It was also a way for me to teach my son Jake, which the character is based on. It was to teach him originally how to read and write. I created the character from my son, who was diagnosed with autism at 3.5, 4 years old. And during that time, when shortly after we had the diagnosis, we did a lot of work about learning what autism spectrum disorder is. And throughout my journey of seeking, help and asking questions and, finding the right the therapies to help Jake. And I wanted to, I wanted to help out the best that I could as a parent, to participate and help with, with Jake's development. Um, So throughout my research, I found art therapy, like, but I found like websites about art therapy, and I was reading up about it. And as an artist myself, I figured this is something I could do. Maybe like I could sit with him and draw, and let's see what happens. And this was a way to help him express himself. I figured that because of his speech delay, he was limited to only 3 or 4 sentences at the time when he was in preschool, and I really wanted to help him out the best that I could. So I figured that I would help use artwork to help him understand his emotions. Uh, it started with um, it started with like an emotions chart where I would use different colors: blue for sad, yellow for happy, red for angry, and this was a way that I could help him identify what he was feeling. Then as time grew on, like I figured it would be cool to sit down with him, and every day after school for like 25 minutes, 25-30 minutes, we would draw together, and I would just take a box of crayons and colored pencils and throw them on the table and give him a few sheets of paper, and I would sit there and draw, with him. And I think it was the first time he realized that I could draw characters he saw on TV. And he was like, wow, he was really fascinated. So he started to emulate everything that I did. And he started to draw his own character. And at the time, it was called like Ultra Jake or Super Jake at the time. And I was really fascinated because there was this amazing story that he had that was just locked away, that it just came out. And he was creating all of these colorful characters. And they were what was fun about it was the fact that he would staple all of the drawings together and make his own comic. And I thought this was amazing. I thought it was great. I'm like, I love the fact that he was so creative. He looked forward to it every day to create like a new issue. And he would come to me, Dad, I have another one. Dad, I have another one, like every other day. And he would just all these fantastic, and he started to emulate the same character that he was drawing, that he would run around in his PJs with a cape. He would make his own costume and run around in the house. I am Super Jake, and like he would even walk around with an iPad to play his own like, superhero music. And I'm like, wow, this kid is amazing. All I had was a towel. Like he fashioned his own superhero outfit out of underwear. This is awesome. So so after my contract was up working with, I was a technical writer and technical illustrator before I started doing the comics full time. Once that was over, I decided like, you know, what am I going to do? And that was pretty much up in the air. I had no idea what I wanted to do, like moving forward. I knew I wanted to do something that was much more closer related to like my passions, but I didn't think I would find it in Jake, which was like once he started going to school, I noticed that he was having some challenges like reading and understanding and picking up the sight words and things like that. So I started making flashcards, and then I got the idea to use his artwork and like create characters in my art style to see if he would pick it up. So he started seeing characters that looked familiar to what he drew, like a 3.5 and 4 year old versus like sorry, I'm not telling how old I am, but yeah, that'll keep that a mystery. But but I originally I said, like it'll be great to create like flashcards and have like the superhero or stuff in like Jake's image. And I noticed that how quickly he started to pick up on the sight words, and I started doing that and progressing to small sentences, and he started picking that up. And then he wanted to know more about what the characters were doing. I introduced these flashcards and the images to like the other illustrations that I did to Jake's teachers, and I was like, well, if he's having a hard time learning, why don't we use superheroes as a way to try to teach him? Because I'm using this and he's starting to pick up on stuff. So, I mean, it's no guarantee that it's going to work, but can we try it to see what happens? And it started to work at that point. And then at that time, I started taking all the, I asked the teachers if I could get hold of like the sight words or stuff that they had for the kids, like whatever they had planned for them, and I would use those to like to teach them at the same time. And that's how the idea is how I started coming up with the workbooks. And then throughout that time, Jake's playing and having fun, and he's doing his pretend play, his cosplay and stuff. And I was listening to him because he narrates out loud, like what's going to happen next to Super Jake. Stay tuned for the next exciting adventure. And I was like, wow, I never did that. You know, so so I started putting on the voice recorder on my phone and I started listening to this entire story. And I was like, Jake, could you do me a favor? Could you sit with me? And I'm going to ask you questions about your universe. And you're going to tell me all about these characters and what they do. And it was this amazing story where there was goblins and trolls and like, like creatures from like, like that we experienced like in fairy tales and stuff, but they're, and I was like, wow, this is really fascinating. So and then it left me with a mission for a few months. How do I turn this into an actual comic book story? So once I did, not only did I grab him into like I pull him into learning by taking some of those situations. And I'm like, this is a great way for me to teach him about the world around him, teach him friendship, teach him acceptance, teach him like how to face his own fears and use that through this avatar, through a character that looks just like him. And the kids gravitated to it in the class too. I had no idea because he was showing it to his friends in school. So one day I'm picking him up, and one of the parents is like, "I love your book." I was like, "What? Oh, that book? Yeah." I'm like, "Thanks." And they're like, "Do you have another one?" I'm like, nah, just have that one. They're like, "Oh, that's too bad," because like my friend has kids and they would really like one too. Went and printed more. Here you go. And then the teacher was like, wow, like the students, they really love that book. Do you have any more? I was like, wait, I got to go back and make more. So then I gave him a few more. I'm like, here you go. And then I remember the principal came to me and I was like, oh, the principal wants to talk to you. I've been out of school for like 30 years. So it's like, and I still feel like when I hear that phrase, I'm like, oh God, what I do. So another principal is like, yeah, we love that. Do you have like a copy I could send to like the chancellor? I'm like, are you serious? I'm like, okay, fine. Like, here's Jake. He has an entire autograph session. And I'm like, wow, it's boosting his self-confidence. He's like learning like values through this superhero that I created. And I'm like, well, let's expand more. Tell me more about the universe. And I brought him in to help me with the story. So now I'm helping him I'm reinforcing like creative writing, like how to write full sentences, reading comprehension, which we eventually incorporated into all the workbooks. And now we have this entire comic book universe that is just wow, just completely just I don't know how to describe it, but it's like where I took all the things that I tried my best to teach him, like how to face your fears, from your nightmares to like sharing to, acceptance and friends and being happy with yourself, and then turning that into like a comic book universe. I felt like, by putting the stories back into the kids' hands and like, and making it enjoyable, making it fun to read, it's like that was amazing. So yeah, that's so that's what Jetpulse is now.
It never gets old too, hearing that, because it encapsulates so much of everything that we love about the heroic narrative. That ability to teach. It teaches us to be courageous, to stand up for ourselves, to see the world around us in a different way. And something that I think doesn't often get discussed too is it's very important for the hero to be able to know when to shift the focus of the world from the self to others. So the fact that also Jake Jetpulse has friends who come along and help as well is important, because it teaches that idea of, hey, sometimes you have to listen to other people. You have to rely on other people. It's not always just about you, even if you're, the most powerful, person in whatever universe. You need help. We all need help in the world. And recently, actually, I just saw this, maybe just last week, a couple of days ago, but since 2012, um, diagnoses of autism spectrum disorder are up, and they're at roughly 1 in 100 children worldwide at this point. And I'll put a link to that study in the notes as well for anybody who wants to just take a look at it. But I say that because we are getting better at finding tools to help everyone, parents, children, relatives, loved ones, everyone. We're getting much better at that. And what drew me to your work was how thoughtful you are about making this something that any child can read this and enjoy it. Period. Any child. But the fact that it is also, in my opinion, such a thoughtfully crafted tool to help, especially parents who might really be struggling, to give them something else. That it's okay to try. You have to try other things. It's one of the reasons why I love mentioning it whenever I can to anyone who is willing to listen, because I just think it's such a wonderfully crafted and thoughtful piece of art, and a tool that can help a lot of people.
Thank you. One of the interesting things that we found that I discovered, and it was kind of taking a bad situation and making it good. It was the inspiration for creating the comic book story itself, aside from the workbooks, excuse me, is I was outside with Jake taking him to the park, and I noticed that the kids were making fun of him because he was autistic. It was just the way how he introduces himself. He's like, "Hi, my name is Jake Bradshaw. I have autism. What's your name?" And the kids, of course, they kind of teased him. They treated him a little differently. They were calling him, "Hey, don't play with the weird kid," whatever. And I'm sitting there watching it as a parent, and I feel horrible because it's sometimes kids, they'll take something and run with it. And there were other kids also too, and I applaud them who were, you know, they did not care. There was like Jake was another kid to play with, and I'm like, you see those kids there? Those are the ones that you play with. Those are the ones that you interact with. And I said to myself, you know what? Don't When you're creating the story, don't tell the reader that that the superhero is on the spectrum. Don't tell them. Don't instead showcase the nuances, the hallmarks through their personality, and that way it creates a conversation. I know you've read it. There are things that you may have seen where I deliberately draw where there's a character, Julia, she's the tech junkie, like the geek, the brains of the operation. And I'll never draw her looking at another character, except if it's Jake or someone that she knows. So she never directly looks anyone in the eyes. Um, Jake's headphones, which makes him self-conscious. I took the time to draw that, to create like a means of having those headphones as part of his super suit. And what they do, it's not a weakness. It's actually there to contain the actual power that he has. It harnesses kind of the way how like how Cyclops ruby quartz glasses keeps his eyes from like just shooting beams randomly. The headphones actually do that. So it's protecting him from the loud noises, because that's is to acknowledge like Jake's, my real son's sensory processing disorder, and to make him feel comfortable wearing them. That I created them as a means to like help him concentrate his power, so that it just doesn't get overwhelming. These were things I wanted to pay attention to, like the Shrive, and who is a ghost. The member of the team, he's nonverbal, and it's like the only one that can understand them is Miranda, who is like the red-haired, like that's Jake's nightmare queen, as he calls her, because her power is that she can manifest creatures from her nightmares to it's like the fight against the goblins. This was something that I also used to help Jake understand his nightmares, to give him power by giving stuff like by giving the creatures names, which is where Mars the Troll came from, which is where the goblins came from. So it was important for me to like not mention autism, but just show it. Like in our upcoming comic, there is a part where Jake acknowledges that he lost control of his powers, and he mentions like the noise was so thunderous, I just wanted it to stop. And that was when he lost control of his power. But we never say what it is. It's just something that the reader will read, and they can identify with it. You may have a brother or sister, another family member, a cousin or something, and it creates that dialogue, helps people understand what autism is without saying. I didn't want to label it or or make a novelty out of it. I wanted something that, like you said, any child can read, but there's something that they can take away from it at the same time.
Yeah, and that's you just put it on display again even better than I could say. That's what I mean by that thoughtfulness. You didn't This was not something that was created haphazardly. You thought through we talked about this on the first episode, but for example, little nuances of things that people might not recognize if they don't study um let's say language or even just communication in general. The the colors in the background carefully chosen, the repeated images that show up are not because you just felt like you needed to repeat an image. That that builds on the idea of patterns and the importance of patterns as well, in especially with well, with children in general tend to love patterns because that's a part of learning. We try to learn about the world through patterns. So it people who have children with autism spectrum disorder would likely recognize that right away. But even for everyone, that's how we learn. We tend to learn through patterns. So again, this deliberate choices on your part as an author to show instead of tell is what makes the comic enjoyable, I think, for everyone. Now, this did not, however, just start with the birth of Jake. You've been an avid comic reader and someone who enjoys that world for a long time. So let me ask you, when did you start reading comics, and what were the first characters or storylines that really drew you into this world?
Wow. Okay. The first comic I think I ever, it was a Batman comic. I remember this. It was maybe 1978, I think is the earliest one that I own. And my dad bought it for me, and I realized that it was so different than the Adam West Batman that like I was like watching and like the Super Friends, and I was like, wait, why is this story different? Well, Batman doesn't smile, you know, and I remember like reading this, and I got like completely like ensconced in that. I remember throughout the 80s, like growing up. Now I think I just showed my age now. Okay. Um, but like as a kid, I loved reading like the X-Men. I loved reading, and the thing about the X-Men that I loved the most was the fact that like mutants in relation to like, I didn't think of it from the societal standpoint because I was too young. I just like the ideas of like, like when you look at it, it's like for a kid, it's like, like it's characters with cool superpowers. When you get older and you start dissecting it, then you start seeing like the societal, like, points to it that like mutants aren't accepted. The like they want to be a part of like society, but at the same time, it's like, well, like just they're not, there's a certain kind of prejudice or like, segregation amongst them. It was really like, significant. And like I'm reading this and I'm like, wow, it really helped me resonate with the characters. But I'll say that if anything, I'd like when I started like reading Batman comics more also, because I think that was one of my first loves. That really got me into like even reading like Sherlock Holmes. Once I understood that he was an actual detective and like not like a superhero, but this was a guy who had absolutely no powers at all. He was Olympic level strong. That's something doable. A person can go to the gym and work out and do that. And a person can be intelligent by like reading and studying. And there was a certain kind of determination about him that like I was fascinated with, because that was a character that a human being can actually achieve to be in some way. I wouldn't don't have the physical prowess to wear tights though, but that was, when you're a kid, you can dream. But that was one of my influences. And then I I was just fascinated by the artwork. But like as I got a little older, it's like the stories is really what grabbed me, and I think that's what also like made me go into the direction of like taking creative writing and taking literature courses a lot more seriously, like learning more, like I grew up reading books of poetry and just from Edgar Allan Poe and things. I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could because a lot of it kind of went hand in hand. There's a certain poetry and rhythm to some comic books, and it's I found that even in like certain comics, there's the inner dialogue that the characters have, and it's like I'm just so fascinated by that. So yeah, that was like one of my first loves, was really like picking up and reading like Batman, like X-Men comics, Spider-Man. I thought Spider-Man was a cool concept. I kind of like characters that are like you know I guess it's like I can kind of relate to their human. I don't find the hero as interesting as the alter ego. It's like Peter Parker, for instance. The kid can't catch a break. I mean, I can relate to that. I
Yeah, and
can relate to that.
I like it's funny too because we're gonna stay on Batman in a minute. We're gonna stay here for a little bit because I
Oh,
do have
please share.
I got some questions for you about Batman.
I hope I have a lot of
Um,
answers for you.
yes, but something you mentioned that I hadn't thought of before, but is so true. I mean, I grew up reading X Men as well, and you're so right that at the very beginning when you're young, you're just so enamored by this idea of powers and like, oh, how do they use their powers? And then it even prompts you to think about uh, what kind of powers would work well against what kind of villains, right? So you're even kind of critically analyzing early, like how you might strategize, like who you would bring with you. What would be your X Men team if you had to face Magneto, or if you had to face, anyone, And so, but then as you start getting older and you start getting drawn into the storylines, you start to love it in a very different way because as we get older, we start to realize the things that make us different from each other. And the more I was reading X-Men, the more I could start to connect with them about, okay, even this person who is a full-fledged superhero has got problems and they have to deal with very human things, and yet at the same time they have to fight a battle that I didn't have to fight, which was to try to even justify their humanity, always trying to fight for that. And then by the time I got into the nuanced discussions between Professor X and Magneto about how they in some ways both wanted to achieve at their best, let's say, wanted to achieve a similar thing, but they had different ideas about how to go about it. And you could begin to see, okay, I get why Magneto is so upset. I get the anger actually now. I get it. I don't hate him as much. I still think he's wrong. And I still think we have to push back against that kind of level of hatred and violence. But I get it now. That was like a brand new thing in my mind where I could see how a villain I could now see why a villain could be made, and I could extrapolate from that to other human beings and start to see other human beings why they're so angry in new ways. And to me, that was just absolutely just mind blowing for
Right.
me growing up.
And what's great about it is the villain is really what makes the hero great. And it's you have to have a villain who's going to challenge, you know, this hero, like push them to their limits. That you really need that, because I don't think you can have a solid story without like a villain who's not afraid to take the hero there. And I needed like even for Jetpulse, we needed like a character, like a villain that's not afraid to to really challenge Jake, because how else is a character who like a character who is on the autism spectrum, how you want to be able to root for them as they overcome whatever challenges they face to become the hero that they're destined to be. And I think that is why, like, the Goblin Queen was really interesting. This is why the Joker and Batman is so, is probably one of the most popular villains, like comic book villains of all time. Why? Is because he really takes Batman to that limit, and it's because it's just it's everything. It embraces, like, the ugliness in us. It actually makes us question our morality. Like, am I really doing the right thing? Am I, and that's what it is, to make you really think, that internal struggle, like, why is this happening? Because this villain is so crazy. It makes you, like, it makes the hero have to take on certain tactics that they generally wouldn't, because they're not they're not conventional, or it's, that the line between villain and hero is, like, really thin. That's when you have a really good villain, and I think that's what really brings the story out. You want someone to challenge, and that's what really draws me into, in the comic books. Give me, like a villain who's not afraid to, that's why they stand out so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Sticking with this, sticking with this theme too of because one of my favorite villains came about. He had already been there in previous iterations of Batman, but the villains that I watched with Batman the animated series, the way that they retold those stories. For example, one of my favorites that was an old villain of Batman, Mr. Freeze. That episode early on in the series when I recently actually showed that episode to my wife who had never seen it before, and she was practically in tears at the end, just thinking about, oh, that poor man, just trying to push back and save his wife. The that nuance again of villainy. Those early episodes of Batman the Animated Series with Clayface, with Two Face, with the Harvey Dent story, they really nailed the humanity of the villain in that series. Um, and so that segues me into something here, which is recently we actually just lost quite a gem in Kevin Conroy, the man who voiced Batman, who just passed away not that long ago. In that, I mean, that I'll just say this: I remember being young and in the movie theater watching Michael Keaton in the Tim Burton, Batman film, and thinking it was absolutely wonderful. But for me, at least, that animated series Batman will probably always be my Batman, meaning that when I think of Batman, I think of that one.
Yes, I
Now,
agree.
oh well, let me ask you, because is this, when you think of Batman, what is the version that most immediately comes to your mind?
Conroy. And I'll tell you why. Because Conroy became the voice of Batman, not only on screen but in my head. So any kind of medium that I'm reading, no matter what I am reading, I, like, if I'm reading any Batman comic, anyone, even the old ones from, like, the 70s or whatever, I hear Conroy in my head all the time. And it's just, that's Batman to me. It's like, and I mean, sure, Affleck was a good Batman. Even Rob Pattinson was a good Batman. Bale sounded like Cookie Monster when he did his Batman voice. Great Bruce Wayne. I'm not taking anything away from the Dark Knight trilogies. That they're great, but the voice was just like, but the crazy part is that his voice, like, resonates with me. That's what my brain comfortably falls into every time I start reading any dialogue from a Batman comic, and it's Conroy's voice I hear. Still, after he's gone, I read anything, I hear his voice, and it's gonna sound funny. I mean, because it's the voice that we grew up on. I mean, it's like the literally everything from, like, the video games to, like, the cartoons. Like, we've always known like, Conroy's voice. We've always heard it. And anything where he didn't voice it, it's we lost our minds. We're like, no, it's terrible. I don't want to listen to it. Like, just don't say anything. And it's funny because I feel the same way. Not to get off subject, but I feel the same way about like Peter Cullen, who voices Optimus Prime. It's like whenever you see like Optimus Prime in anything, like the movies or the cartoons, if I don't hear Peter Cullen's gravelly voice, it's not Optimus Prime. I'm not listening anymore. I've lost my attention span. I'm like, I'm done. It's like, you can have this. I'll go make something to eat. So yeah, it's but yeah, Kevin Conroy is like out of all of the movie, the live action Batmans, like I wish that he had the opportunity to wear the suit at least once. I mean, we got it in the Crisis, in the Arrowverse, the mashup. We got to see him as Bruce Wayne, but which was cool. But I would have loved to see like Conroy's jaw in a bat mask. Just once in his life, I wanted to see that. You know, because that
Yeah.
just made my head explode.
Yeah, I'm I try to be I tried, I should say, to be realistic about it in terms of hearing different Batman voices. Like Jason O'Mara, I think is someone who does pretty well. He's got that Dark Knight kind of feel to it, but where it misses always for me is that Conroy was able to differentiate between Bruce Wayne trying to be Bruce Wayne, like trying to perform as Bruce Wayne, which I always thought was really funny how he would change his voice and the way he spoke so like upbeat out of nowhere. He'd be like,
Right.
which
And
was
he redid an
clearly
octave too, so
yeah,
that it was just like, which is
yeah,
cool.
it was so clearly um Conroy being Bruce Wayne who's also pretending to be Bruce Wayne. Like it was always that really funny for me, which I don't see that level of nuance. I just see the I'll use this voice for Bruce Wayne and I'll use this voice for Batman. But someone is gonna have to pick up that mantle and do a good job. I just don't know if anybody has really stepped up to settle in yet. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's a lot of that's big shoes to fill. I think for a while it's going to be something like it's like Heath Ledger's Joker. It's going to be something that out of respect and reverence, people aren't going to try to go near because it's immediately you're going to have an entire genre of like young adults and like guys like I'm not naming, not going to say my age, but a lot of guys who are going to like we're going to have our ears to like our ears to the television paying attention like he's no Conroy, and it's going to happen. We're going to judge that vocal performance like so it'll be a while before, like, I'm sure, take your time.
Yeah.
Like take your time. I'm sure they'll find someone. It's like Heath Ledger's Joker before, like before like the Joker movie, we thought that no one else could ever play the Joker. And it's like Joaquin Phoenix did like a phenomenal, I mean, an amazing job that like it like that's like those are two of the best performances I've ever seen of the Joker. And I'm like, my God, remember like in Tim Burton's Batman, there was Jack Nicholson's like, yeah, nobody can touch that. That's Nicholson. Heath Ledger comes along, the universe is like, dude, hold my beer, and like gives us Heath Ledger, and we're like, oh my God, nobody could do better than that. And then Joaquin Phoenix comes along, and we're like, okay, all right, this was just insane. you know
Yeah.
so there will be someone, and I'm pretty sure, it'll, I'm pretty sure they'll do like a fantastic job. I just hope they take their time finding like a suitable replacement for him.
Yeah, and that's the beautiful thing about these characters, is that you can have these different iterations, uh, placing them in different time periods and different situations. Um, for example, even with Batman and the idea of the Caped Crusader versus the Dark Knight versus the detective, I give I give them I give Matt Reeves, the director, a lot of credit for trying to go the route of the detective more than anything, which I think there's still room there that you can really explore Batman as detective. And I find that to be really fascinating because Nolan didn't really do that. He had certain spots where, with the phones and stuff like that, but to me, the kind of the Dark Knight came through with mixed in this idea of a Caped Crusader as well a little bit, but clearly it was Dark Knight to me. Let me ask you this because I think this is where we might split. So let me see if that's the case. What did you think? What did you think of the Matt Reeves, Robert Pattinson, the Batman film?
That's a world I would really love to see them explore more. Honestly, I would really like to see that. It's the Batman that like the like to tell you the truth, out of all the movies, I would say I loved the dark and gritty kind of dystopian Gotham City in like Tim Burton's Batman. I like the direction of like putting Batman in a real world like the Dark Knight trilogy, you know, in the comic book fantasy world of like the Snyderverse, you know. But there was something about Matt Reeves' version that took a little of all of that and gave us like the detective. It felt like a mystery. It felt like a thriller, and that was like the kind of like situation that I would enjoy seeing more of Batman in, because I feel like from reading detective comics, like that's damn near a near perfect movie. I mean, I thought it was a really good portrayal and everything. We got like kind of like the feel of like the Batman Year One story. Um, like an unfinished kind of like roughly built Batmobile. He had like it had a lot to it where um you had like a hero who wasn't a hero yet, and that was like the pretty much like the year one Batman going in, where you have like the detective who the police don't trust him, and it's like, but here he is like solving these crimes, and it's like the way how he's doing it was a whole methodical way that and he like that was Matt Reeves made it easy to follow along with the clues, with the glyphs, like piecing things together, and like the reason why the Riddler would want to do the things that he did. It kind of like it felt more like these characters are real. It's like, like Batman before like all the colorful rose gallery, he was fighting gangsters and mobsters, and having the Penguin running the nightclub, and the way how the Penguin is portrayed in it, which I thought was a great performance too, because I tell you the truth, I had no idea, like really, I like that was so amazing. But I thought it was they did a really good job with that. Like the whole detective story, it's good to see Batman actually doing detective work. That's what, that's the Batman that I know. And we get a lot of it from the cartoon as well, when Batman is sitting at his computer and he's going through, you know, we got like the tell you the truth, Tim Burton handled it better in like 19 like in the 89 Batman than Chris Nolan did in the Dark Knight trilogy. At least like, like Michael Keaton's Batman is talking about like the Smilex, the formula in multiple products, and it only works when they're all used together. I mean, that's you know, cool. We're getting a detective story, and it's like awesome. He's actually using that skill. So it's like, but now we have a whole movie where he's a detective. It feels like a Sherlock Holmes mystery. It feels like like suspenseful. Catwoman is told in a good way. So I'm like, yeah, this is somebody who actually studied these characters and put something together in like in a format that that everybody could enjoy. Long, but yeah, I dig it.
Interesting. Okay, so I didn't like it as much as you did. But I will say that I agree with the fact that one, we were due to see the detective side of Batman. And like I said, I give Reeves a lot of credit for having the guts to say, you know what, the Cape Crusader Dark Knight thing has been done. I don't need to try to do that again. I can go this other route with one of the greatest detectives you'll find in any superhero universe in Batman. And I never thought of the fact that you're right. That, looking at the Smilex formulas in, with the Keaton Batman, there was an more of an element of the detective in those stories than in even the Christopher Nolan one, with his little bit of, like, technology use, which they kind of tried to use that as a pseudo detective kind of thing, but it didn't work well for me. I thought the phone storyline was kind of a little bit lame for me with Nolan. But, and here's my issue.
Mm-hmm.
My issue was with the execution of it, of the Reeves vision, because I thought we didn't get enough of him actually being the detective. I found that by the end, when he's talking with the Riddler, I don't know if I saw everything playing out in that discussion the way that it came across. What I mean is, um, I'm not so sure what Batman necessarily figured out there by the end. And that was perhaps my biggest issue, was trying to think, well, wait a second, he did the detective work, but for me at least, I lacked that moment where I thought, oh wow, yeah, Batman got it. Batman figured this out. So maybe help me out there a little bit. Where did the detective work actually lead to?
Okay, the detective work actually did lead to Falcone's arrest. You know, it led to that. It led to it led to, let's see, a few other things too. Um okay, by his monitoring or staking out like Catwoman, he was able to like to piece together like the whole drug thing, that was going on, like the Penguin's still active despite whatever happened in the story. And we got our cool Batmobile scene. um the other part I wanted to add too is, like, to add to this, that makes it also very interesting, that because that Batman is actually relatively new in this iteration, is that, you know he hasn't become the Batman that you and I both know yet. So it's like, so when he's still developing that, yeah, he's able, like, to put like these, to put like these pieces together and figure out that, like, okay, like the bird or whatever thing they were talking about, whoever was going to sing was Falcone. I think that was what was leading up to that part all along. But who the Riddler is, or what his whole plan was, I don't think we were meant to find that out until, like, after, like, the Riddler's whole Silence of the Lambs reveal, like, near the end. So it's like, so yeah, when I went in understanding that, I went into understanding that, okay, this is like, we don't like, okay, Ben Affleck's Batman is, like, already 11 years into his career. By the time you see him in Batman versus Superman, there's already been a Robin. That Robin's dead. He's grizzled. He's the one that doesn't shave and, like, puts his mask on. Like, we're not supposed to know. Um, you know, so it's a whole different look to him. It's a whole different feel, and it's like, like, you've got that been there, done that. I'm not amused Batman, but now we have a younger guy who's still kind of green. He's still, like, learning to be like this Dark Knight that we know. So there's like these little things. So he's gonna have hiccups. He's gonna have like those missteps in the story. I mean, I thought it was great.
Mm,
That's why I said there's elements of Batman Year One in this story. And if
yeah.
you, like, read like Frank Musicelli's like, uh like Batman Year One, like, you see the missteps that Bruce Wayne makes as he's, so I thought that was actually pretty cool. It was kudos to add that in there to show that, you know he, he's not the guy, like, this is not the guy we know yet. Like, we're just getting to know him, and it creates like this whole character development for future movies. So I'm always thinking in the long, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like, I look at that and I'm like, yeah, cool. I can dig it. That's where I started to appreciate it, because I went into the movie being like, ah, man, you know what I mean? And then after a while, when I sat there and thought about it, and I was like, yeah, he's not the Batman we know yet.
Yeah.
Like, he's riding around on a motorcycle with the Batmobile still in pieces. It's like, by the time we, it's like there were certain things I did, like that I did like admire. Like I'm glad they added that because it gives Batman a more like human element. It, like anyone in their profession, like maybe not a doctor, but like a policeman. Like you're going to be different on the day you retire versus the day you started because there's a whole career of things that you've seen in between. So I take that as like the same thing with Batman also.
Hmm. You know what's interesting? You've convinced me to give it another watch and look at it again. And you've also I'll say this. This is one of those films for me that you can actually make better through your second film. So if in the second
Right.
film he takes that next step that we all kind of want to see, right? Where he doesn't even have to be that Batman yet by the second film. But if you see that he learned something from the first one, and I would say to Reeves, I would be very direct about that if I were him. I would even reference that first film to show that he's learned something. That would definitely make me appreciate the first film more, I think. So I think you can do that. I think you're right about that. From that, so let's move from the that young Batman to the more grizzled one here. I recently just flipped through Frank Miller's Dark Knight Saga again. And as I'm looking through this, I'm reading it and I'm saying to myself, wow, you know what? This could have been written yesterday. I think this still very much this storyline, the feel of it still speaks to us today, but I wanted to ask you as somebody else who kind of loves this, what do you think? Do you think that that storyline still holds up for today?
Yeah, I do believe so. I mean, it's like given like taking a look at the Dark Knight Returns. What I found fascinating by it is that this is a version of Batman who's retired after like the death of Jason Todd. This is this is like this is like what Batman with the PTSD would these are the actions of a man with like post-traumatic stress. This is like a man who suffered tremendous loss by the death of his sidekick, his surrogate son. This is somebody who just pretty much hung it up. I don't want to do this anymore. you know Nobody else needs to die for my cause. And he's just basically living out his life. And this is the what I found very interesting is like, and you can find it in a lot of people where the loss of someone significant, does change the course of like the choices that we make. I know it's done that, in my life, and I'm sure many others, where it's like certain things you just the color kind of gets lost, and you're just wondering, why am I doing this? You begin to question that, and that's where we find this character at this point, in the story. And given like now that we're acknowledging PTSD as to where before when it was written, like we're I guess back in like 80, 88, 80, like or even earlier, I think it's like 86, you know um I was a kid and I don't recall there was a lot of talk about that, but like to see a character affected in that sense where they just stop being this character, like this character just stops being like this superhero and just goes into hiding. I mean, that really spoke to me like later as I was older and read it again. I was like, like, wow, like this devastated him. And to see like how like crime has just taken a completely, how when left alone, how things just go from bad to worse, how like the gangs in Gotham City have completely just taken over. It's like, to this kind of like hell on earth kind of thing where it's like the gangs have pretty much taken over. Yeah, and like by the time Batman does return, the only people that do remember him are like senior citizens. Like they're the older versions of us. Like, hey kid, you're in for a surprise. Like watch this. You know, And he's and then you have a Batman now who, because of like the death of the death of Robin, who's reluctant to take on another partner, who's a little bit more violent and a little bit more like a lot more cynical, and just it's like we don't have like the same the morals that he once had are like kind of blurred now that we have this older, more affected hero. So yeah, that part of the story still resonates because that's a very human trait, I guess. I'm no psychologist, but like for me, it's like, that's something throughout the ages that will always exist, where, you know, the way how we handle loss and like how it affects everything that we do from that point on, which I thought was absolutely amazing. The crime, how when left alone, it like things just have a tendency of just going straight to hell. And if you're watching the news and paying attention to social media, you would think that like the world has completely lost its mind right now. And yeah, these things do make sense. And then like there's also a political from a political standpoint in The Dark Knight Returns, where Superman is like, the presidential messenger, or like, things like that, like the poster boy for justice. And it's like, you know, these are also things that, like we need like a face, a poster boy, somebody that we can, to keep people in line so that you don't mess up, so there's so much about so many elements about this story that like written like it's still like it's ahead of its time. It really is. And now I have to go back and read it again. I it's but it really, I thought like it was really intelligent story. Like whoever wrote, whoever sat down, like when Frank Miller sat there and was like, what, I'm gonna make a Batman story, but it's gotta be like, like this is a guy whose wheels were turning. This is not someone who just said, I'm just gonna make a Batman comic and it's gonna be cool. This is somebody who really thought about the state of the world, in like 86, and said, if we don't change what we're doing, this is how we're going to wind up. That's what I think it is. And you know, and I tell people all the time, it's one of the greatest Batman stories ever written. You should read it. It's amazing. And yeah, I mean, it's like you get to see a little bit of Bruce Wayne's Batman Beyond persona written in there. But it's so good. And I think like it really resonated with me because like after after the passing of like a loved one, like one of my like my uncles, I went back and I read it again. And it was one of the things where that's when I really identified with it. Just seeing like this character, just at that point, I don't care. It was just like, I'm just not there, so I was amazed. Yeah, it was really, like really like, yeah, it really does like it really does bring like a human side to these characters. It brings a certain humanity to them, a certain vulnerability that you didn't see in comic books back in the 80s when it was written, which I thought was incredible. Because at that point it was like the Super Friends, the Justice League, they beat the hero and they are on to the next mission. But this time you see somebody who's broken down, who's like there's no real reason why they should get up and fight.
Yeah.
They're done. And that was the first time to see that. Kind of like The Empire Strikes Back, the first time you ever watched a movie where the heroes lose. It's like these are significant stories. That this is reality, and that's what like kids my age, at the time, like that's what we wanted. We wanted to see something we can identify with, and it gives us that.
Yeah, and people it's almost become a cliche now to say that it's a groundbreaking story, but it really is. Like it's one of those things where I try to tell people you don't get it when you have to read it to really truly understand why something like this is such a fascinating take on the superhero, on Batman particularly as well, right? Because of like what you said, the we would, outside of that storyline, you would never think of Batman as somebody who could get to that breaking point. And yet the way that the story evolves, even from the very beginning, when you see just how cynical he's become, oh, it makes sense. You sit there and go, oh no, I get it. I do get it now, actually, how he could be broken like that. And like you mentioned with that loss as well, we all go through times in our lives too, even just on a daily basis, where sometimes we say, I don't want to be this person today. I don't. And other days where we feel like I have to be this person today. I have to take up this mantle and be, husband, father, teacher, brother, all of these things. And that's so beautifully encapsulated in that storyline to me that I think it truly is, to say the cliche again, groundbreaking. And you mentioned, and I wanted to ask you about this. We're moving a little bit toward the end here, but you mentioned, of course, Superman here as well. And recently, Cavill just came out and kind of dropped a bomb saying that he was not going to reprise his role as Superman, even though he had his cameo in Black Adam.
Yeah.
So where do you stand on Cavill as Superman at this body on this body of work of his? Are you upset? Are you excited about something new? What do you think?
It's a mixed bag of opinions for me. Like James Gunn doing a Superman movie, I mean, like he did great with Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm looking forward to seeing what he does. However, it is a big mistake to let Cavill go. I think, like, to tell you the truth, it's like I grew up with Christopher Reeve as my Superman, and I'm like, no, no, but like, like everybody else who wears it, they suck. Who cares? Dean Cain, rah, like no offense to anybody that loves like, the Lois and Clark series, but like, I'm like, Christopher Reeve, and I begrudgingly would stand on that hill and be like, Christopher Reeve is my Superman. And, Henry Cavill comes along and I'm like, well, not bad, not bad. And I think what really did it too was that Snyder's version of Superman, which a lot of people didn't like because they're so used to everyone loving Superman. Yay, it's Superman, yay. Because even like the Donner movies back in the day, like those movies didn't show like Superman as like the way how like Snyder was bold enough to show the Superman that you know some people feared him, some people praised him. You had people that looked at him like a religious idol, and then you had those who looked down on him and like completely were afraid of him because no one human being should have like, well, human, he's not human but he looks human, but not one person should have like that kind of power. And this is something grounded in reality. Like people are like, that's a stupid story, really. So you know Cavill is portraying this superhero that's kind of like pulled in different ways because we finally getting a Superman that's based in reality. You can't say that it never happened. Snyder was the one that gave it to us. Like, what happens if in the 21st century, in this day and age, that we learn that there is an indestructible dude who can fly? How would we treat him? There are some people like, yay. Oh, then you have the religious folks who would probably look at him as a calling from God, which they did in the movie. Then you have some people that would completely ban this guy, get rid of him, put him away somewhere, burn it with fire, you know, like they'd be afraid of him because the thought of him taking over the world. We finally got that in this movie, and Henry Cavill portrayed it well. He did. He portrayed it very well. Let's look at the story for what it really was, and that's what Snyder gave us. And I think Man of Steel was great. Batman versus Superman, another movie that's really underrated. And I know people might I'm going to get shade for this one too, but yes, I liked that movie. Yes, I did. And what I liked about it was that yes, this is somebody who said said, look, let me get into the comics and check this out. Oh yeah, wait a minute. Batman and Superman do have a shaky relationship. They don't really like each other too much. That relationship is in the comics. It's not like the Super Friends where they're just shaking hands and good job, Superman, good job, Batman. It's like no, the both of them have the same ideals. but different means of doing it. Like we were talking about Professor X and Magneto is the same with Batman and Superman. They just one doesn't like the way how the other one does, gets from A to Z. So I thought it was I thought that was actually a cool way of actually showing that. Yeah, like Cavill did an excellent job at like being like a Superman who was, and this is another thing that we just mentioned before. Superman, the Superman that we saw on the Man of Steel is not the Superman that we know yet. We needed time for that Superman to develop. I think people were really quick in jumping in. That's not Superman. Superman wouldn't do that. Superman wouldn't act that way. But I think what people missed is actual character development. Like they wanted to show, and like to tell you the truth, we wouldn't have needed like a James Gunn new series if people have just understood that the Superman movie that Snyder gave us is exactly what they're trying to do now. Giving us a Superman that's already like, that is just becoming Superman. He like in the movie, he just gets the suit. He finally realizes, hey, it's the public names him Superman. He's still rough around the edges. He winds up destroying half of Metropolis in a fist fight, but he's learning. It's like that's the part that a lot of people had controversy with. But I mean, it's like, and I get it, but that was actually part of the story to show how where this new Superman is, if that makes sense. If I could justify that, like, it's like, did it have to happen? No. Could it have been avoided? Of course. Would the Superman that we know would have allowed that to happen? Of course not. But you have to show where people make their errors, where people make mistakes. And I think that's where like a lot of these characters were the writers, the creators aren't afraid to show that now, nowadays.
I think I was not I didn't I just certainly did not dislike Man of Steel. It made me it put me in a wait mode essentially, where I thought, okay, I don't necessarily like the brooding darkness of it, but again, I wanted to wait and see what are you going to do with this? Because again, that second movie is always actually in some ways the more important one for the legacy of the first one. And I felt that way about Man of Steel. Personally, I think that this, what was it, from 2013 until 2022 with Black Adam even. I think that time period is going to go down as probably the biggest missed opportunity and wasting of talent in some way. Because I like you grew up, Christopher Reeve was my Superman, and I didn't particularly love the other ones who came along the way. But they had something in Cavill. They really did. They had something there. He knew one thing that I think he did better than Reeve, dare I say, is showing that difficulty of being Superman. Reeve was a classically trained actor, and it showed at times. It showed the gravitas, the almost Shakespearean gravitas struggle that he had. But Cavill did a much better job of, in some ways, showing a suffering that he had to hold inside, that he had to deal with from the very beginning. And I thought that part of Man of Steel was actually quite good and quite important to show. But the way that they, I'll even stick up for Gal Gadot here as well. I liked the first Wonder Woman movie, liked it. I didn't love it. It had its flaws. I hated 1984. I did. I hated it. But even with her, that's a wasted talent because
Yes.
you could have done something more with that. She was quite an interesting Wonder Woman figure, and I can say maybe the highest compliment you could give Affleck was that any failures that happened around him with that universe, that's not Affleck's fault. He did not do anything to warrant being blamed for anything that went wrong. I thought his Batman was quite good, and the love that he had for the character I think came through in the way that he played his scenes. So I even liked Affleck, to be honest with you. So at the end of this, you bring in The Rock, and I ask myself, well, what was the point? What was the point of any of this? If you kind of knew that this is where you might have gone, I would have just shut the thing down maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Just shut it down and maybe reboot it again with, I don't know if you could go back to Cavill, although I don't think anybody would have screamed at going back to Cavill and letting him maybe move the timeline forward a little bit is what you could have done 5 years later or whatever, however you wanted to do it. But I will always look back at this and think to myself, boy, you really wasted some good acting here. You wasted
Oh yeah.
some good potential.
Yeah, I mean, I stand by that like Man of Steel, and like in essence maybe like there were some things that weren't executed, you know, they were executed like well, but like there was some like the idea of like watching a movie where, like as you mentioned, like the suffering, there was a lot of conflict, and Henry Cavill was great at showing like the conflict of like, I've got all this power and I want to help but I don't know how. That scene when he's talking to the priest in Man of Steel,
Yes.
which shows you that kind of conflict, like what do I do? you know when he's talking, when he's talking with his father, when he's talking to Jonathan Kent, and they're talking about the school bus scene, and he is like, what was I gonna do, let them die? And the father was like, maybe, like even saying like going that dark and be like, maybe that would be a good idea as long as it's protecting you. I don't want anything happening to you. I mean, like, imagine a human a human being telling an indestructible alien, I don't want anything happening to you, knowing that nothing on the planet can hurt you, but you're still a parent and you're like, you don't want to have anything happening to them. And these are like, it just shows you like the vulnerabilities. And like, by the time he is Superman and he's wearing the suit, you're finally getting Superman, but he's not there yet. And it's like, and I was really rooting for it, like you, like we would get like Batman versus Superman, like before Justice League. Give us another Man of Steel movie where it's like we hear the John Williams fanfare where he finally gets it. A missed opportunity. Like it's like, as a as a fan, I don't know why you would want to deter from that, because it's like that would be the big payoff of that entire trilogy, is that one moment, with hands of the hero like at his hips and everything, with the cape blowing in the wind and hearing the John Williams music. Finally, like Cavill gets his moment. Dude, we'd love that. Like, seriously, there wouldn't be a dry eye in the room from a bunch of grown men crying. It's like, it would be amazing. Missed opportunity. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, you're right. What they needed to do, because Justice League was not done well, in my opinion. It wasn't. And one of the reasons why, I think, was, why did you rush Cyborg even? Why did you do that? You have to take your Cyborg is one of those characters that people, for whatever reasons, I mean, he's become this household lovable figure that people really want to love. And maybe that's the part that I think the DCEU missed out on the most, is just how much people like us were actually cheering them on. Like, yeah, just give it to us. We'll love it if you put some time and thought into it. We want you to do well. We love these characters and these stories. And so when Cyborg came out so rushed in that way, and so monotone and singular, they didn't put a lot of nuance in his character. I thought, well, that's a problem right there. And then having another Man of Steel film before Justice League, I think you nailed it. You're right. That would have made all the difference in the world. It would have set up that storyline even a lot better. Why they care so much, why they're so, it would have set up even their big scene of all of them fighting, Superman freshly resurrected. It would have made that scene even better, which was clearly their big scene that they wanted to go for there. And I believe, I'd have to double check this, but the cameo in Black Adam at the end, there is a hint of the John Williams music, I believe.
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
Now, let me tell you something. When I saw that, I thought to myself, and now you're choosing to cancel that character. Now. So you give us that moment that we've been wanting this entire time to blend the two fan bases, the young people who grew up with Cavill, those of us who grew up with Christopher Reeves. You have this finally this beautiful moment that makes people so excited, and now you announce you're taking it away.
Right. It's like
Can
slapping a
you
plate of cake out of your hands.
it
It's
I
like,
mean,
why?
can you do something any worse than that? And that's why for me this whole thing is just a big failure at the end of the day. The whole thing. And it's such a shame too because like you said Cavill, he did bring something that was truly his own and he did a very good job. He really did. You know, I give him a lot of credit. Very good. But at the same time, I don't know where they go at this point. I don't see a clear pathway. People talk about, flashpoint, paradoxes and things like that, but I don't see it. Now you've got the problems with the actor as well. I don't know where they go. I think you're at the point where maybe you do have to shut it down.
I think like at some point I was hoping, I was really hoping, and this would have been like possibly one of Warner Brothers' greatest crossovers of all time. And I would have loved if this actually happened. But since we saw the Crisis on Infinite Earths thing on like the Arrowverse on like television, imagine if the movies played a parallel timeline to that Crisis and then blended the television side with the movie side, because they did it with Grant Gustin and Ezra Miller in that one scene where you had both Flashes. You finally had the DCEU Flash with the Arrowverse Flash face to face. Amazing, great cameo. That would have been awesome to see it from the DCEU side, like the Crisis leading up to that whole thing with the mother boxes, with with Apocalypse, with leading up to that point where you're seeing like the DCEU seeing the Arrowverse side and vice versa, and then creating one cohesive universe at that point. You know, that would have been cool because that would have at least straightened everything out. Because it's like from that point, like then we can have like Batman 89 and everything. And like from there on, you could brand it as like Batman Earth 89, you know, like Superman Earth 78, or like whatever year it came out. And then like now like the viewer knows that this is something that exists in DC's multiverse. You know, all of it's legit, all of it is good. There's nothing to take away from these. There's the main timeline, and then there's the Christopher Reeve ones, which is his own Earth, considering what year it came out. Batman, Batman Earth 89, Batman Earth 90, yeah. And you could do that. And that way you could kind of like create this whole linear, timeline of existence for the DC universe. I, um, Anybody know if they're like they need writers? Because like I need to jump in there and help them out. Because
Yes,
it's
they
like,
do.
why, dude? Why? Yeah,
Yeah.
because that was something I really hoped that they would go for, because for the casual, for a casual viewer, I mean, like, yeah, you could watch a Christopher Reeve movie and then watch 89 Batman and never ask questions. But then for us, the guys who read this, the guys who have really been following from day one, this will actually help create some kind of order for anyone else. Why not do that? Now, you could have held out on the Justice League thing, and I think they rushed that because at that time, like Infinity War and like Endgame were like beasts. Like these were movies that I guess like no one could possibly compete with, and these were epic movies showing that you can have these kind of superhero crossovers and they can work. So, but yeah, but at first, give us Man of Steel, give us Wonder Woman, give us Aquaman, give a Batman movie, Suicide Squad, another Man of Steel, and everything. Give a Cyborg his own movie. Let them have their own self-contained movies where they're interacting with each other if they want to have like guest appearances in them. Leave Justice League for the end. Let these characters develop and then become the characters that we all know, and like give us this big payoff, like when they're all fighting Apocalypse or whatever it is that would have been like the big bad of that series. Yeah, there'd be plenty of time. We'd understand.
Mhm.
Like you're building a universe. Look how long it took Marvel to get to, to fighting Thanos. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
we're good with that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree. And
cool.
and think about this, Led. Are you ready for this? We're about to head
Sure.
into 2023. Man of Steel was 10 years ago. They could
Oh my
have
god.
they could have been we could have been getting the Justice League movie now or
Yes.
somewhere around now, right? Because 2008 Iron Man, 2019 Infinity War, right? Or Endgame actually was 2019. We could have been excited for, because the other problem I had too was they completely blew right past Darkseid. They blew right past him. That is a villain that people really could have, the casual fan and the casual moviegoer should have been more excited about. He's much more powerful than they let on in Justice League in that film, and they just didn't lead up enough to it, And now for me, I think in some ways you owe it to the fans. I think you close this whole thing out with one final Cavill film. That's what I think. I think 2023, you make one last film and you close out this universe because obviously you have no idea what else to do with it. But he deserves that, and I think us, the fans, I think deserve one more film.
Yeah, I mean, another thing. Speaking of like, speaking of canceled, like in bad decisions and like canceled movies, or it's like like did you hear like the Batgirl
Yeah,
movie we were going to make too, and like Keaton was supposed to they completely filmed this movie and then canned it. I mean,
you
I,
made the movie. I mean, you made it already.
let us see it. It's like,
You,
why, like let us see it. What's wrong? Just like, like let's just see it. Maybe I'm missing from a financial standpoint why they're shaving off all of these other prospects and stuff, or oh, okay,
I
but
mean, if it's a bad film, then have fun with it at least. If it's a bad film, bring it out to us. Let us enjoy it. Let us watch it in
right.
some way, as opposed to putting it away in a vault where now it's just going to become, it moves from mysterious to nobody cares. So what has been gained even there at that point? I say bring it out. Let people just watch it, and if there's something good in it, like for those of us again who watch the Keaton films, that alone is going to bring a smile to our faces. Just seeing Keaton in the
Right,
outfit
exactly.
is going to be like, all right, that was worth it.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
enough.
put it on HBO Max if anything. If it's not going to be too much of a problem, I mean, like, but let us see it. I mean, it's like I'm still even curious about like the Back to the Future with Eric Stoltz. I'd like to see what they did. I mean, I'm that kind of guy. Like, don't just can it and make it disappear. It's like because we already know about it. It's one thing to like to never know they made it, and it's like, yeah, this was in development, but like, oh, okay, too bad. It's a different story. But it's not like when you're actually like like comic book and sci-fi websites are showing you like screenshots of like behind the scenes photos or set photos, and you're like really hyped, like, yeah, this is gonna be cool. We're gonna get Flashpoint, we're gonna get and we're gonna, we're gonna get Batgirl with like Keaton, we're gonna get like a movie with Keaton in the bat suit again. And then you find out, like, yeah, we're just gonna shelf this. I'm like,
Yeah. No, I
why?
hear you.
What's the point? And what was the point?
Yeah, I hear you.
So
Even
I
if
think
it's
a lot of it
bad.
is like the like rush. Yeah. Even if it's bad, it's still pretty good because we're gonna like we get Keaton in a bat suit, and I don't think anybody's gonna care. It's just like I'll just like watch the scenes of where he's in, and I'm good. I mean, get to see that Batmobile again. I mean, come on,
Yes.
that's awesome. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably one of the greatest Batmobiles they've ever made. That
Yes.
one, you know, yeah, love
Yeah.
that one. I mean, the Tumblr had its purpose. No, no, no. I
No,
mean,
I
even
was like
Affleck's
you.
Batmobile was,
Not a big
yeah,
fan of the Tumblr. I wasn't. Yeah, not a big fan of the Tumblr. I
not a big
prefer
fan.
a good Batmobile. You
Yeah,
need a good, cool looking Batmobile.
right. You need something that looks big, menacing, and just like Batman, his presence. You need like something that's going to be like menacing and scary. It's like the thing like was as long as a hearse. I mean, it was even longer than that. I mean, with this giant turbine sitting in front of it. I mean, this thing just looked massive and scary. And I remember that scene of like, in that movie where it's just barreling down the streets of Gotham City and everyone's moving out of its way. Like they're afraid to go near it. That's the kind of it almost like it was almost like an animal itself. It had like kind of an organic life to it. It looked great. But yeah, I mean, geez, I would have loved to see that car again,
Yeah.
you know? And just to be in that part of that universe again, like this is, a much older Batman. We don't know if even Alfred's like even like in this world or out of it by now. And like it would be nice for like, like the boys and girls who grew up watching this movie, you know, like to revisit that world to see what it's like again after like 30 years or more, like what
Yeah.
32, 33. Yeah. So
Yeah. Just give
yeah,
the
forgive my
fans.
math. The weekend that I can't count.
No, that's fine.
But give us what we
Yeah.
want. Yeah.
Give the fans something that they want to love. It's not that difficult. These decisions, I think sometimes they overthink them. It's not that difficult. Give the fans something that they will love, that they want. Yes, there are going to be people who complain. There always are. But at the end of the day, if you give the fans and even the casual fans something to just cheer about, just like
Right.
this the John Williams little medley coming out in the cameo. That was better
Leave
than the
that escape.
film. That was better than the Black Adam film. Quite honestly, that was the
I
most
mean,
enjoyable
you
part.
can hear just 2 minutes of that music and know where it's coming from. And it's like Star Wars, Indiana Jones, like these are movies like that are just the music is even more famous than the movie that it's in. And I think like people need to realize that like I guess like the big wigs, the executives and stuff. I mean, I hope I'm like I'm screwing myself by saying it, but I mean like we like to have that escape. This is a world now that we're in. We want to like we we want to relax. We want to unwind. We want to get away from the things that that scare us, like the things that we're concerned about. There's already enough stress in the world going on. It's like, yeah, give us a hero. We want to see the hero's journey. I like and the thing that it is that like as a storyteller, as an author, the one thing that I like, I guess I could say from my own personal experience and from what I've written is that like now I understand it more. Is that like the like understanding the hero's journey. If you want to motivate people, let us enjoy the hero's journey. Just like that's what we want. We want to feel connected to someone who's doing it, and then we can and that's where children and young adults and even a lot of adults ourselves find that motivation and like that reinvigoration and like that need to reinvent ourselves by watching somebody else climbing that ladder. And that's what's really important. It doesn't matter on like how much money is spent like creating a budget for special effects, because Hollywood has already shown that we can do a lot with really good storytelling and not as much special effects. It just how much story are you willing to tell and how deep you're willing to go to really connect with your audience. And that's what it is that like I understand it. Don't if you hear the dog toy in the background, don't worry, he's going bananas right now. I think that's a squirrel. I have no idea. But it's yeah, he's really going to town with that squirrel. But yeah, everybody loves like the hero's journey though. It's like that's really like the biggest experience, giving the hero challenges and seeing how to overcome them. It's like going to a Rocky movie and feeling pumped when you come out. And it was like it's that same kind of feeling that we all go to the movies for. This is why we read comic books, to really escape, to find to find that connection. And I think like a lot of it is lost because we're looking at like the next big CGI spectacle, and like who can we hire to be this role, and like like the fan fantasy of like who would play this role. But like just give us a story that we can all connect with. And I think like at that point like we can get back to Hollywood movies that like everyone can fill up the auditoriums again and like sit there and have a field day. It's that's what I think. I mean, I'm just like you know I'm just a guy. What do I know? But
Well, plenty.
but
And
that's
and
my idea.
I mean, quite honestly, I think you nailed it. Absolutely. I think you're 100% right. And I can't think of a better way to, or a better message to bring this to a close than that. You're 100% right. I could not have said it better myself. Please tell people where can they find you, and how can they support your amazing work here.
Yes. Yes, please support the adventures of Jake Jetpulse. You can follow us on social media on Instagram at Jake Jetpulse. On what were the other ones? Oh my lord!
You
On
got a
TikTok
TikTok?
at Jake underscore Jetpulse. And at our website, of course, which is www.jakejetpulse.com. And sign up for our newsletter for really cool content, exclusive artwork, and news about like our upcoming issue. And we look forward to interacting with everyone.
You know, I was looking forward to this conversation, and you did not disappoint at all. This was everything I wanted it to be and more. I always learned from you, and I always love hearing the passion that you have, both for helping your son and for helping other people as well. And just your knowledge in general on comics is just, and the love that's there too. It's always a fun time for me. Led, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been wonderful.
It's been an honor. Thank you so much. I hope we do this again.
Human beings have looked up to heroes and heroic narratives from the very beginning. We need symbols and figures to aspire toward, not because they highlight everything that we're not, but because they remind us of what we can be when we strive to be great. As a teacher, I love speaking to people, even in just random situations. I love to just have conversations. When I talk to people today, I get the sense that we have grown afraid to strive for greatness. Maybe it's because being great places you too much in the public eye, or maybe we're just afraid of failure. Either way, as a species, we can't afford to not strive for greatness. As long as we keep humanity in our thoughts and humility in our hearts, we can certainly make the world a better place for ourselves and others. And we need plenty of great people like yourselves to help out. Until next time, try to keep one foot firmly planted on neutral ground. And have a great day. Actually, have a super day.